So, do you believe that you have a divine impulse within you, that everyone walking this planet has a divine impulse in them, guiding them in each moment, where to serve, where to speak, where to share, where to see, where to give? Do you believe that? Even some of the words on that song guide me to what I am to share today. Do we recognize the power that we have in any and every given moment if we follow that urge, we follow that intuition, we follow that spiritual guidance, we follow that leading, that prompting of our soul's calling into a moment of vulnerability to even share something that is going on? Do we understand the power of that sharing to heal? I think a lot of times we fall short of recognizing that there is something going on in me, that if I would just take a leap forward and listen to that inner voice, that still small voice, and share it with you, it may be exactly what you need to hear. It may transform a suffering into a gratitude. It may alleviate a stuck place and make it an amazing vista. It's ours to constantly be circulating our life force and our good. In Unity, we talk about this circulation. We talk about it as tithing of your time, talent, and treasure. But it is not specific to Unity. In fact, it's in all of nature, no? Try not sharing your breath. Try not sharing the molecules that make up your body. Try not sharing your thoughts. There might be some people in our lives we'd like to go, yeah, try that one for a little bit. But we are circulatory beings. Our whole body systems are modeling a circulatory life force. So too is our spiritual practice a circulatory practice. To not circulate is death. So then the question becomes not, do I circulate, but how do I circulate in a way that goes beyond human, beyond humanity, beyond normal and ordinary into my divine nature? How do I circulate in a way that is of my nature, of this source, of my calling? How do I circulate in a way that is extraordinary? How do I circulate in a way that elevates consciousness and transforms? How do I do that? Because we can go around circulating. We can go around circulating and call that life. Osho had a great statement. Osho, the Zen teacher, he said, the real question is not whether life exists after death. The real question is whether you are alive before death. Whether you are alive before death. We're here to circulate. In sacred text and scripture, it says, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's very grace. We each have a gift. We tend in the human condition to complicate this. We tend to complicate this. We tend to think of ourselves as small, as little, as possibly not being agents of transformation. But there is not one soul on the planet that is not an agent of transformation. We have a tendency to take our little minds, our human minds, and think about our situations and our circumstances, our location, our influence, our prominence, all of these things, and we tend to belittle ourselves in a place of not being able to make a difference. But has anyone ever had a grandmother, an aunt, a friend, that their very breath, their very life force saved yours? Who they were and who they showed up as on the planet transformed your being, elevated your being, and from that elevation, your being was able to elevate others. Think about people that supported, people that mothered, people that parented, people that grandparented, people that friended the master teachers throughout the ages, the saints and the sages. They did not get to where they were without love without having the great gifts of source being shared, not just from the level of consciousness that we can't see, but from the level of tangible reality of people that were around them, in front of them, of examples. So we're going to talk a little bit today about sacred spiritual action, sacred service. And to talk about sacred service, ironically, I want to talk about why we don't do sacred service. Why do we step back? Even though we know we're beings of circulation, even though we know it's not really optional not to circulate, we will spend our time doing stuff. Whether or not we'll spend our time prospering UVerse or Time Warner Cable or AMC, some of it here, some of it there. Whether or not we'll spend our time circulating and sourcing things that we want to have be lasting on this planet, or whether or not we'll spend it having things and generating things and prospering things and creating things that we wish never crossed our paths, is simply a matter of mindfulness. It's simply a matter of choice and commitment. So what are some of the things that keep us from circulating our good? One thing is the false search. The false search. In this human condition, we spend a lot of time, do we not, searching for that does not lead to the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven I'm talking about is not a place far off in it's not a place far off. It's not a space we go to after we die, right? It's a consciousness. It's a consciousness that exists on the planet. It's a consciousness that exists in mind. Wherever we are in the physical, it's a consciousness, it's a field. So that false search that we in the human condition go about can be a search for power, a search for wealth, a search for materialism. And when we go about that search and we go in those directions, not that there's anything wrong with receiving, not there's anything wrong with having those things show up, having power show up, having wealth show up, great, even more to serve with. But searching for the purpose of receiving those things will always end up falling short of what our soul's calling is, of what our true deep desire is. Because I do believe that our only true desire of the Father, of the source, is to be who we are here to be one with that source, to know that we are wondrously made. In Scripture, in John 1:4-7, it says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever love has been born is of God and knows God." So we are of that love. But when we go on a false search and we start searching for power, searching for material goods, thinking that it's going to bring us fulfillment, we come up short. There are two ways to use power when we get it, and we all have it, do we not? We can use it if you think of all the examples of power, all the examples of leadership. You come to two things. You come to people who serve, and their life goes beyond their own even intentions, does it not? Their life expands, like sprouts out, roots beyond their physical being, beyond their name, and becomes an energy, becomes a field. So you have that kind of power. Those are people who serve. And then there's another kind of power, and that's the power that manipulates, that controls, that binds. That's another form of that power. And in each moment, it is ours to make the choice to look at how can I use the power I am, how can I circulate it in a way that liberates, in a way that accelerates, in a way that transcends, in a way that uplifts, in a way that alleviates, in a way that awakens. But we have two choices on how we use that power. The second reason I think that we end up not going into service and circulating our lives mindfully is the idea of separation. The idea that we even have a separate self, that we could even seek for the me that is me, that there is an us and them, that if I care for me, somehow I will be better off. But just like the environment teaches us, I cannot care for me and not care for you. Nor can I care or pray for you and not benefit from that. You just have to take pollution as the example. I cannot possibly clean my air and not clean yours. So what if the mind is the same way? What if in 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now, they have proof, scientific proof, proof in quantum physics, proof in some modality that we don't even know, that in fact that same activation, that same air filter, that same purification system or pollution system is in our minds and in our thoughts, and that we're circulating it all the time, and that we have and hold that power. The sense of separation keeps us from service. But all it takes is a moment in principle and a moment in center to get back into knowing that our lives are not separate from each other. I cannot for one moment separate my life from anyone else on the planet. So I cannot serve myself without serving anyone else. I cannot serve anyone else without serving myself. So why would I want to do anything else except for be of the highest that I came here to be? The next is this kind of syndrome that's descended upon the planet, and I think it's a bit of a spiritual impotence. It's pretty easy to look around the world and to look around even our own families and our own communities, even within our own selves, and feel impotent to make any change. Feel like, what could I do to make a difference? There's too much. There's too much heaviness going on. It's too hard. It's too difficult to overcome. That concept, that idea, is simply an ego mind. It's simply an ego thought to keep one's self from its divinity, to keep us from reaching our greatness, to keep us from circulating. It's simply an illusion. But until we step into that illusion and tell it to go back to the nothingness from which it came, it's an illusion that can leave us in a state of non-action. I recently read a writing by Ram Dass about keeping our hearts open. I titled this talk after his writing. In the writing, he talks about the smile of unbearable compassion. He says this: we all know our humanity too well. That is why we put our focus on recognizing the part of us that isn't the humanness. Not to deny the humanity, but to bring balance about. Because that's what you offer another person. When I look at some of you, he says, and I know you have problems with addictions, problems with sexual obsessions, problems with loneliness, problems with anger, problems with diseases, problems with frigidity and tightness. And I look and I see the whole sea of stuff that you tell me about. And I just see curriculum after curriculum after curriculum after curriculum. And I just see a group of beautiful souls on earth, each having its own karmic work to do. At the same moment when you present it to me, my heart hurts. You don't protect your heart from breaking, because in a way, a broken heart is like cracking a shell to let the deeper heart come forth. Because compassion is like the monk who is crying because his son has died, and the student comes up and says, what are you crying about? You know it's all an illusion. What are you crying about? You know it's all an illusion. He says, yes, but the death of the son, the death of a son, is the greatest illusion. You don't close off your humanity by any means, but you balance your humanity. And if you don't balance your humanity, you burn out. This is a critical piece for each of us. If we don't balance our humanity, we burn out. that stops us from circulating, which is out of our nature. He goes on to say, and if you don't balance your humanity, you armor your heart. And if you armor your heart, you starve to death. And that's why you burn out, because you are not getting fed. You have to avert your eyes from the suffering of the world. You can't look at the have-nots in the world. You can't stand it. You have to look away all the time. You have to avert your eyes from Central America and from India and from those places because you just can't stand it, because you feel so impotent to do something to take away the suffering. If you are going to be free, your freedom means that you do not avert your eyes from anything in yourself or in anyone else. Freedom means to be a free awareness with what is. No aversion, no attachment. They say that for a saint, all the world are their children, and you feel the suffering of another person the same way you would as if it was your own child. It's almost unbearable. Can we breathe into that for a moment, that aspect of each of us that can really feel that and feel the moment where we may have looked away. We may have looked away because we said, I'm too sensitive for this planet. It's too much for my heart. It's too heavy. It's too overwhelming. And we looked away. He says it's almost unbearable. What makes it bearable? There's a little statue of the Buddha, and it has a smile at the edge of its mouth. It's called the smile of unbearable compassion. Sounds like a paradox, the smile of unbearable compassion. It is the unbearable compassion. It is beyond bearing. And if you were somebody, you couldn't bear it. But you are the universe, and that is what you are. You are all of that, and it is the balance inside yourself, the smile of unbearable compassion. When we can breathe into that space, when we can keep our eyes open and keep our hearts open, when we can trust that even if we begin to let the tears flow, we don't have to fear that they will never stop. Then we can be in harmony with the moment. And when we are in harmony with the moment, we are at oneness with our source in that awareness. When we're in the awareness that we are one with all of life and one with our source, an impulse, an intuition, an inspiration, a power, a life force, a vitality, a direction comes within us and expresses out from us that lives a life beyond human, that lives the life we're all here to live, that we're all called to live in each moment. In Thessalonians it says, therefore encourage one another and build one another up. We can only build one another up if we are willing to presence one another, if we are willing to keep our eyes open and our hearts open, which means we can only be built up if we are willing to courageously and authentically and vulnerably be presenced, be experienced, really authentically by the people in the world around us. When we can breathe in to the smile of unbearable compassion, we lift our lives to another way. We lift our lives in another form. We become something more than we are. There were a couple examples that came to me and probably came to some of you online in the last couple of weeks. There's one story about a Turkish couple that was getting married, and they're right next to Syria, where they're refugees, and they were getting ready to do their wedding celebration and doing the planning for it. And instead of doing what is customary, which is a lavish banquet with a 2 to 3 day celebration, the couple decided to join with a nonprofit and get a food truck and bring the entire wedding party to the place where there were refugees. And instead of putting on a dinner party where they could eat greatly and they could celebrate each other, they decided to celebrate their love, celebrate their family tradition, celebrate their marriage with a feast for the people in Syria that were refugees. Something that an ordinary person could do. Now imagine if not only that idea could be embodied there, but if that idea were to take off and were to feed young people going out on the adventure of marriage all around the globe. Imagine what one little thought can do. There was another story about a woman going in to pay her light bill, her electric bill, and she was getting up to the counter and she heard the woman in front of her trying to pay her bill and trying to get her light back on because she had children at home that were in the dark and that needed the electricity, and she was crying that she didn't have the money and trying to negotiate getting the light back on. And she didn't have the $90 to pay for that bill. So the woman behind her in line stepped forward instead of paying her own bill with the money that she had and needed to pay her own bill, and she paid it forward and paid the woman's bill in front of her. By the time she got out to her car, there was $100 on her windshield with a little note. And then the little note read that it was for her, for stepping forward and for blessing someone else. The note just said, "For blessing her, I'm blessing you." And there was a $100 bill. Our egos tend to think service starts as extraordinary, but actually service starts as ordinary. Service starts as knowing that the one sitting next to you is wondrously made, and that if you feel that impulse, it's yours to go with it, it's yours to be vulnerable, it's yours to share, it's yours to give. The film on Friday is a film where we get to follow the stories of 5 normal, average individuals that didn't know how, didn't know what, but they had an impulse, they had a fire burning inside of them, and they just stepped forward into what seemed maybe like the darkness, one moment at a time. I mean, imagine the woman we saw in the trailer. Imagine her with her little son crying at the scene of a natural disaster on television, crying, suffering with that. And seeing your own little child, your beautiful little innocent child, suffering at the woes of the world. Imagine that intuitive moment to try to step back from a sense of separation, to not close the eyes and close the heart and turn off the TV and say, "Sweetheart, don't watch that." But instead, to step forward in a moment of empowering the gift of life and say, and know, truly know, if he feels this in this way, there's something for him here. If I feel this in this way, there's something for me here. So let us not judge our gifts of service. Let us not say because I'm here or there or because I have this limited framework or this limited scope, what I do and how I show up doesn't make a difference. Let us all know the power of our influence. Because it is impossible when you are one with all life and you step in to circulating your good, circulating your gift, circulating the divine guidance you have in that moment. It is impossible not to make a vibration that reverberates through the entire whole, raising the consciousness and transforming every other element. Amen? That reflects who and whose we are. So we come together to empower. We come together to serve. We come together to decide what kind of world we want to live in and to give ourselves the freedom to see ideas, to create what this life will look like. You are the transformation agent. Namaste.